Hello and most welcome to 1358. We will continue with a chapter from Shaping Science with Rhetorics. This book. And it's authored by Leah Ceccarelli. And I will continue where I left off in 1357. This is chapter 5. A text rhetorically designed to negotiate different interests and beliefs. I am currently at page 87. It is the fourth paragraph actually, that I will begin here. And we just got into Schrödinger and his book. And earlier on she had compared Delbruck and Bohr's writing and also Müller's writing. And now she comes into Schrödinger. Among the biologists who wrote book reviews, H.J. Müller immediately recognized that Schrödinger's goal was similar to his own. He also predicted that, unlike his own attempt, Schrödinger's interdisciplinary negotiation would be a successful one. This little volume should prove valuable in furthering the much needed liaison between the fundamentals of the physical and the biological sciences. It is to be expected that its function will mainly be to serve as a stimulus for inducing further progress. In this direction. The geneticist C.D. Darlington read the book as a bipartite discussion of the progress of genetics and cytology on the one hand, and of physics and organic chemistry on the other. progress brings a physical understanding of biology that is both physical and biological in its importance. David Allardyce Webb, a botanist living in Dublin, also argued that the book was a merger of two fields. The author's aim is ambitious. It is to set forth in 90 small pages the principles of quantum mechanics and of genetics. And to suggest a speculative connection between the two. In addition, the naturalist Carl L. Hubbs and an anonymous reviewer for the medical journal Lancet both accepted Schrödinger's apology for an act of seeming trespass. On the grounds that he was embarking on a much needed and quite successful synthesis of facts and theories between the two fields. Other biologists read the book as a description of how a study of physics could help biologists answer fundamental questions in their own field. For example, the geneticist J.B.S. Haldane was skeptical about the impact of the book on physicists. who he believed were much too interested in atomic energy to turn to the study of biology. On the other hand, said Haldane, every geneticist will be interested in Schrödinger's approach to his or her science. Likewise, the immunologist Peter Medawar saw the book's emphasis on the physics of the living cell as a lively and interesting addition to the study of biology, something that is just what the professional biologist wants. Physicists who review the book tend to read it as an even-handed negotiation of disciplinary interests. According to the theoretical physicist Leopold Infeld, the book was not meant as an answer to unanswerable questions in the biological sciences. It deals vividly and intelligently, however, with questions that lie on the borderline between physics and biology. In doing so, it introduces a new field which many people believe will form the center of future research. The physical chemist Michael Polanyi also predicted that the book would spark an interdisciplinary collaborative effort. Schrödinger's book will exercise its guiding influence on aspirants to a scientific career looking for new worlds to conquer. The sense of belonging together will be truly strengthened between biologists on the one side and physicists and chemists on the other. The book will stimulate meetings and discussions between the two groups of scientists, which may bear precious fruit. These excerpts show that though some scientists had slightly different views on the purpose of the book, they all saw it as an attempt to add something important to their own field of research. Whether through a collaborative alliance or the importation of ideas and information. In the remainder of this chapter, I examine the textual devices that contributed to these positive readings of the book and its purpose. The four rhetorical strategies that I discuss worked by directing the attention of distinct interpretive communities in different ways. In so doing, these strategies created in each reader's mind the most favorable possibility for a physical study of biology. The first strategy appealed to common values, even as it spoke separately to physicists and biologists. The second appeal to the common goals of the two disciplines through two parallel but complementary statements about promising new areas of research. The third shifted the traditional linguistic practices of the two disciplines to subtly resituate professional loyalties and thereby promote cross-pollination of the fields. And the fourth strategy appealed to individuals with different ideological beliefs by promoting different readings of the same passage. All four rhetorical techniques worked to direct different readers for different reasons along the same path of research. Negotiating common ground, the value of precision. The first thing needed in a book seeking an interdisciplinary response was an assurance that biology and physics share enough common ground to make collaboration possible. This need was especially evident in the first 3 chapters of Schrödinger's book. Where he attempted to give both physicists and biologists some basic knowledge about what is normally studied on the other side of the disciplinary fence. The situation called for Schrödinger to divide the two disciplines, speaking to one and then the other about the fundamental theories of their counterparts. But such division runs the risk of further polarizing the two groups. What is interesting is the way Schrödinger maintained common ground despite the constraints of his task. Sensitive to the dual audience, he was able to emphasize similarities even while describing the differences between the two fields. He began by speaking mainly to the biologist, explaining in chapter 1 that the laws of physics and chemistry are statistical throughout. In these pages, he tried to appeal to a reader who is learning for the first time about this condition of things. Explaining to the biologist that this information is as fundamental to physics as, say, the fact that organisms are composed of cells is in biology. In contrast, chapters 2 and 3 introduced the physicist to the basics of biology and genetics. Explaining the hereditary mechanism and mutations, concentrating only on the essentials at this point. He apologized to the biologist, half of his audience, for the dilettante character of my summary. This apology is just one of several that were placed throughout this section of the text. in most cases, Schrödinger made general statements, then immediately retracted them in the footnotes for the benefit of those who possessed more sophisticated knowledge and who might have objected to the oversimplification. For example, in the text he wrote, the actual size of atoms, while in the footnote he conceded an atom has no sharp boundary, so that size of an atom is not a very well-defined conception. With the text he proclaimed, in meiosis, the double chromosome set of the parent cell simply separates into two single sets. With the footnote he admitted, in fact, meiosis is not one division. Accompanying these frequent retractions were apologies for the oversimplification. For instance, the biologist will forgive me for disregarding in this brief summary the exceptional case of mosaics. And I have the bad conscience of one who perpetuates a convenient error. The true story is much more complicated. Although the first chapter was devoted to educating the biologist, and the second and third were devoted to educating the physicist. There was no specific preview directing the two audiences to separate chapters, nor did Schrödinger ask either group to skip ahead in its reading. Schrödinger was addressing both audiences with these retractions and apologies. Both could read them as a deference to precision. As a result, two groups would be reassured concerning the fundamental similarity between their disciplines, the common ground of precise science. While being made aware that there was much to learn about the complexities of the other field. Negotiating professional goals. The appeal to ambition. Though all scientists share certain professional values, such as precision, the specific professional goals of biologists and physicists differ. As Delbruck explained in his 1949 lecture, the physicist seeks absolute laws about inanimate matter, while the biologist seeks general regularities about living things. An appeal for mutual action from the two groups would have to somehow transcend this difference. than ask physicists to help the biologist reach their goals, as Muller did, would demand that biologists abandon their goals to study the absolute laws of physics. A successful interdisciplinary text would have to negotiate the professional goals of the two groups. One way in which Schrödinger's text was able to do this was by generating appeals from the general ambitions that all scientists share. The thrill of being recognized by one's peers and the promise of gaining power over the natural world were professional objectives that both physicists and biologists could appreciate. So to inspire an disciplinary alliance, Schrödinger's text used an appeal to scientific ambition. Could I ask? This appeal to fame is similar to Dobzhansky's inspirational calls. Using his ethos as a renowned scientist, Schrödinger advised the ambitious scientist reading his book that the best way to become successful would be to locate a project that is timely and promising. Focusing on the history of genetics, He pointed out that Mendel's discovery in the 1860s went unnoticed because the world was not yet ready for it. Nobody seems to have been particularly interested in the abbot's hobby, and nobody certainly had the faintest idea that his discovery would in the 20th century become the lodestar of an entirely new branch of science, easily the most interesting of our days. The fact that the physicist Max Planck discovered quantum theory in the same year that Mendel's work was rediscovered is significant, said Schrödinger. Arguing that both genetic theory and quantum theory took time to mature before they could be productively connected. He proclaimed that now is the time when a connection could emerge. Later in the text, the same language used to characterize genetics appeared again. This time to evaluate the work of researchers who combine genetic mutation and atomic physics. These facts are easily the most interesting that science has revealed in our day. there are other moments when the text tries to assure the audience that a physical study of the living cell holds promise for the scientist who engages it. For example, Schrödinger called the X-ray mutation studies of Timofey Resovsky beautiful work. That is ingenious in its application of physics to biology. He praised the recent success of the united efforts of biologists and physicists to determine the size of the gene. And he applauded the genetic work of the German physicist Max Delbrück. But these evaluations only served as a backdrop to the more grand proclamation that genetics is the branch of science that is easily the most interesting of our days. And the subsequent proclamation that the physics of the genetic mechanism produces facts that are easily the most interesting that science has revealed in our day. Of course, my comment is talking about the DNA and how they bear a code. Which is incredibly amazing, of course. A young scientist seeking a productive field of research could hardly ask for more pointed advice than these approving words of wisdom from a famous Nobel Prize winner. The ethos that Schrödinger carried was a significant component of this appeal to ambition. The same words offered by an unknown voice would hold little persuasive force. However, the way in which the appeal was worded as a double proclamation also contributed to its persuasive impact. Had Schrödinger merely remarked that genetics was the science most interesting of our days, he may have alienated physicists who saw nothing of their own science in the proclamation. On the other hand, had he merely argued that the physical study of genes produced facts that were the most interesting of our days, some biologists may have interpreted this statement as the reductionist move of a physicist who wanted to encroach on their disciplinary territory. The fact that Schrödinger made both remarks was significant to the inspirational impact of his appeal. For the geneticists, the positive assessment of their field by a famous physicist could only serve to confirm their belief in the accuracy of his further claims about timeliness of collaboration. Their egos had been stoked by the first claim, and their ambition was directed by the second. For physicists, Schrödinger's first claim was combined with the second claim to suggest that the genetic material was ripe for the study by physicists who wanted to make significant new discoveries. Put in a pause there with my help of my colleague. I will continue here, and I think Leah here so clearly depicts in the excellent writing the human want of knowledge, and especially how Schrödinger, in contrast to Bohr and Müller, is able to even more encourage both biologists and physicists to enter into their different paths. And it struck me, especially after the coming of Francis and Crick, the understanding of the genes, how inspiring that is. What an deepening of knowledge and understanding it means to be able to read out the gene as a universal language, see how it affects, constructs, produces and reproduces or reiterates itself, and how this way of knowing, wanting to understand more, leads into the interlocking that happens much later, because once we understand enough about the genes, we sort of learned that they are unchanging and they give definite answers. This is the world I grew up in, and at this stage the cogs are, so to speak, interlocking, and I call that the cogs interlocking, and we get a sort of, in knowledge itself, starting from the human want of knowing into an unchanging movement that becomes a determinism of sorts. And this is what I claimed for a long time. Richard Dawkins, for instance, among others, is not ideological. It is how his or our thinking has sort of interlocked. I am born in a certain way. I am who I am because of my grandfathers, going all the way back. And I realized that because in Dawkins there is still to this day a further interlocking principle, and that is what is called one origin, which is not shared by others or not all, but it goes to show it's knowing itself that has this form. The other strand, quantum mechanics, is showing us you can have this understanding, but since I am an observer reading off, it is only if my understanding cogs, so to speak, who understands this. This is something to understand. If this is also interlocking, only then you have this interlocking process. But I can have this understanding and not locking my own understanding. We do understand from the observer point, something that we often forget. And I would say something that Schrödinger had a grasp of and is even able to put to words to an extent. And this is why it's so inspiring. Let my colleague here have a technical description of this hard word to spell, meiosis. We also find it in Greek letters here. And I give that microphone to my dear colleague here so you can hear the technical description.
Yes, meiosis comes from ancient Greek meiosis, which means lessening. We have the same word in minus. Minus is a lessening. And I will read a description of meiosis. Meiosis is a process where a single cell divides twice to produce 4 cells containing half the original amount of genetic information. These cells are 4, 6 cells. Sperm in males, eggs in females. So I repeat, during meiosis one cell divides twice to form 4 total cells.
Very good.
And let me see, what did she write about this? Perhaps you will continue. So why is this important, meiosis, for
Yes.
our, please explain.
Definitely.
Attention.
We have a whole field opening up that wasn't possible for human understanding before Francis and Crick. And I think this is an incredible good viewpoint into how knowledge is developing and how it expands, but also in a way how it shuts itself. The observer can be polysemic. That can be something that is frightening, nauseous, but I would say, and this is indicated in the understanding of Schrödinger, it's an opening up. You can understand it in this way, and you can have a meiosis of the understanding itself. And I'm not talking about the content of the understanding. I'm speaking about the landscape, the form of understanding. How is the quality of the understanding, not how you, so to speak, would express it. This is, of course, the complementary of quantum mechanics, or, if you like, in literary theory, polysemy. Several meanings, not excluding any meaning, not diminishing any meaning, and in a contrast to a more monosemic understanding. Nota bene, it doesn't mean necessarily you can express the polysemy in words. As you see here, the whole process could be put into reverse, but that could be extremely hard to explain. I'll continue a bit from the text. I am now at page 92 and just under the first paragraph. Although these two statements were deeply embedded in the text, rather than prominently displayed at the beginning or ending of a chapter, a look at the response of Schrödinger's readers suggests that this appeal to ambition was striking to the memories of both biologists and physicists. The geneticists Darlington, previously Muller, and Haldane all quoted Schrödinger's assessment of genetics in their book reviews. Pleased that Schrödinger had proclaimed the superiority of genetics, all three of them went on to praise his attempt to inaugurate a physical study of genetics. On the other side of the disciplinary fence, the physical chemist Polanyi was impressed by the claim that genetics was the most interesting branch of science. And he was additionally impressed by subsequent arguments about the potential success of collaboration. In his review, he quoted Schrödinger's assessment of genetics right before predicting that young scientists seeking new worlds to conquer would be influenced by Schrödinger's book. From the response of his readers, it appears that Schrödinger's use of parallel wording in these two inspirational calls positively influenced both the biologist and physicist contingents of his audience. Negotiating disciplinary linguistic practices. Conceptual chiasmus. Just as the specific professional goals of the two disciplines differed, so too did the linguistic practices. Since physics traditionally works to understand the laws that operate on inanimate matter, the language of physics speaks mainly of objects that lack purpose. Objects being pushed about by mathematical laws. On the other hand, the language of biology in Schrödinger's time was still occasionally tinged with animation, purpose, and the gleam of the soul. Very important. although the notion of vaporous spirits that animate the body had long since been abandoned. The vitalist force remains stubbornly at the center of the vocabulary used to describe cellular life. Even strict reductionists such as Muller, who believe that genetics could be fully explained in terms of physical forces, relied on vitalist language to describe the action of the gene. He did so because it was the natural language of his field. For example, in his article urging physicists to contribute their time to the biologist's quest, he described the property of genetic autoattraction as a mysterious interpretive force. Unlike the ordinary forces of adsorption known to the physical chemists, these gene forces are of such range as to act over visible microscopic distances. In doing so, moreover, they must in some way interpenetrate one another in many directions. Since the forces of attraction of many genes must be traversing the same space at the same time. And despite this interpenetration, these forces must somehow preserve their directions and their specificities. To the skeptical reader, this force sounds suspiciously like that old vitalist bogey, action at a distance. And be careful, it's not spooky action at a distance. Just a little note. Likewise, vitalist language polluted Muller's description of the second property of genetics. This second peculiar property is that of autosynthesis. That is, each gene reacting with the complicated surrounding material enveloping all the genes in common exerts such a selectively organizing effect upon this material as to cause the synthesis. Next to itself of another molecular or supramolecular structure. The gene actually initiates just such reactions as are required to form precisely another gene, just like itself. It is an active arranger of material and arranges the latter after its own pattern. As this passage shows, to explain the property of autosynthesis, Müller anthropomorphized the gene. Giving it the ability to make intelligent choices and determine its own fate. The unequal power relations implied in Müller's request that physicists work on these problems for geneticists probably did much to attenuate the effect of his essay. But the vitalist taint in the explanations of these problems may have contributed to the failure as well. Most physicists were comfortable working with inanimate matter, not with active arrangers. I comment here how true. In a book that successfully connected physics and biology, the conflicting linguistic practices of these disciplines would have to be negotiated. The solution that Schrödinger stumbled upon was a reversal of linguistic practices. To make biology intelligible to the physicist, Schrödinger had to rid it of its mysterious, vitalist presumptions, describing biology in clear, mechanistic language. To make physics intelligible to the biologist, he had to describe the objects and concepts of physics in the language of purpose and action that was so familiar to the biologist. He used this reversal strategy throughout the book. Living matter was consistently described in inanimate physical language, while inanimate matter was described with living vitalist force. This reversal probably served two functions. First, when Schrödinger was instructing physicists about biology, his use of physicalist language made biological matter seem more accessible to them. And likewise, biologists found his description of physics accessible through the metaphors of life applied to it. Second, the reversal worked as sort of conceptual chiasmus. Forcing each group to not only recognize their own study in the territory of the other discipline, but to see their own territory open to the conceptual tools of the other discipline. Biology became more mechanistic and physics became more vital. The conceptual apparatus of the two disciplines began to merge, making the possibility of meaningful collaboration more likely. Let us look more closely at how this was done. In Schrödinger's text, atoms, the basic units of physics, showed cooperative behavior. And heat motion was found striving against magnetic force in a rival contest. Permanganate molecules also exhibited purposive action. Every one of them behaves quite independently of all the others, which it very seldom meets. Atoms continue their vitalist agenda as they play a dominating role in the very orderly and lawful events within a living organism. They have control, they determine. But though atoms and physical forces were given vital energy, bacteria and organisms had this purposiveness taken away. They had no choice as heat motion tosses them around. The human body was made mechanical when Schrödinger argued that our organs of sense, after all, are a kind of instrument. And what may be considered the most vital living forces of all, egg and sperm, merely coalesce in the author's description of fertilization. I just have to add that this so marvelously mirrors the now famed Scottish thinker and neurologist Ian McGilchrist, where what he calls the left hemisphere's take on the world can perform and have a perfectly correct worldview, with all the shapes and all properties firmly locked into place, whereas still the right hemisphere in the very same lockdown can find life and other ways at looking at it, indistinguishable in the eyes of the left hemisphere from what it's saying itself. This is a true duplication of the world. Complete sameness from one perspective, no singular change in anything, but still a completely different world from the right hemisphere. It is the number of worldviews that changes. Schrödinger is doing the same thing. Sometimes Schrödinger found it too difficult to make the switch. But when figurative language of agency slipped into a passage on biology, quotation marks undermine any suggestion of purposive action. With genetic mutation, some change is tried out in rather a haphazard fashion. The author had no problem anthropomorphizing atoms, but felt the need to underline the metaphorical nature of his descriptions when it came to gene mutation. Likewise, Schrödinger used scare quotes to call into question the organism's purported vitalist ability to escape the second law of thermodynamics, just getting better, while resituating that ability in the individual active atom. An organism's astonishing gift of concentrating a stream of order on itself and thus escaping the decay into atomic chaos of drinking orderliness from a suitable environment seems to be connected with the presence of the aperiodic solids, the chromosome molecules, which doubtless represent the highest degree of well-ordered atomic association we know of. Much higher than the ordinary periodic crystal, in virtue of the individual role every atom and every radical is playing here. The astonishing gift of an organism's agency was given an ironic treatment through the scare quotes. While the role-playing of the atom was presented as a straightforward account of its power over motions of the organism, likewise, in other parts of the text, quotation marks were employed to counter any suggestion that mechanistic language could be used to describe the activity of atoms. A number of atomic nuclei, including their bodyguards of electrons, when they find themselves close to each other, forming a system, are unable by their very nature to adopt any arbitrary configuration we might think of. The very nature leave them only a very numerous but discrete series of states to choose from. Well, I will sum up here. It is just marvelous. He's doing a complete revolution, a meiosis, if you want, of what one would expect, turning the table, so to speak, making DNA and the biological systems mechanistic, deterministic, and at the very same time showing clearly the animistic, willful, volitional, animate tendencies of the atomic world, of the quanta. Its liveliness in exactly the same elan vital way of Müller, using that language to emphasize how it all could be reversed, but still mirror each other, and thereby enthuse both physicists and biologists without making violence to the understanding he was true to, having different meanings without them at any instant refer to the same reality, but still working parallel to each other and being true. It is something I would maybe depict like this. He put into words, let's say this is an equation of either physics or biology, that this is referring to different things, but still being the very same in the meiosis way, being an iteration of itself, and thereby expanding what could be understood from a singular monosemic take on either biology or physics. And he does it in one swoop. And I would say that is quite impressive, how to manage that, and thereby firing up the movement that became so strong after that of molecular biology, DNA readout, geneticism's major working tools, making it incredibly attractive for everyone who wants to enter into the subject. The vitalistic take would have discouraged so many people. And oddly enough, and I find this very interesting, the one who were being the most vitalistic in language was a reductionist like Müller, in contradistinction to Schrödinger, of course. Maybe there's a question from my dear colleague Kalle here. I will turn the table this way. There you go.
Hello, hello.
That is yours.
Hello, hello. Can you turn the camera?
It is turned.
Yes, good. So, I would like to quote from What is Life by Schrödinger. So, in this book, he has an epilogue entitled On Determinism and Free Will. And he writes on page 86 in my version. As I believe every unbiased biologist would, if there were not the well-known, unpleasant feeling about declaring oneself to be a pure mechanism, for it is deemed to contradict free will as warranted by direct introspection, but immediate experiences in themselves, however various and disparate they be, are logically incapable of contradicting each other. So let us see whether we cannot draw the correct, non-contradictory conclusion from the following two premises. First, my body functions as a pure mechanism according to the laws of nature. 2. Yet I know, by incontrovertible direct experience, that I am directing its emotions, of which I foresee the effects, that may be faithful and all important, in which case I feel and take full responsibility for them. The only possible inference from these two facts is, I think, that I in the widest meaning of the word, that is to say, every conscious mind that has ever said or felt, I am the person, if any, who controls the motion of the atoms according to laws of nature. So we could say that Schrödinger puts forward two contradictions. And in one way he accepts the mechanistic way, but on the other hand he also says that we control the atoms, if I understood his contradiction. So he both eats the cake and has it. And that is the greatness with Schrödinger. And it gives food for thought. So that's the reason why Leah Ceccarelli is important for us. And I hand over to Hans if he wants to end with something or add something. Please.
It is obvious that Schrödinger has transferred his understanding from quantum mechanics to knowledge itself. In order to have one singular view, you have to have two contradicting views. Otherwise, singularity cannot be had. He is the physical variety of Derrida and Heraclitus together. Is most interesting, I say. Thank you very much for listening out and have a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye for now.